the 5th millennium, somewhere in the spaces between all rings of reality, at a time when I thought we had achieved perfect harmony across all existence, I discovered that our greatest triumph had attracted the attention of something that should never have noticed us at all. My name is still Theron Drakeheart, though that name now carries meanings I could never have imagined. When I first took up Dawnbreaker in defense of a single realm, as a bridge guardian, I exist simultaneously across multiple dimensions. My consciousness stretched between the mundane concerns of individual lives and the cosmic responsibility of maintaining the infrastructure of existence itself. But this tale begins not with cosmic threats or interdimensional crises, but with something far more personal and infinitely more terrifying. The discovery that our success in uniting the rings had fundamentally changed the nature of what it means to be alive. The first sign came through a child. Her name was Arya, and she was born in a small village in the realm of Ethermore, the same realm where my story began so many centuries ago. At first glance, she appeared to be an ordinary mortal child, the daughter of a baker and a weaver, blessed with the simple joys and sorrows that make mortal life so precious. But Arya was not ordinary. She was the first of what we would come to call the resonance-born children, whose very existence was shaped by the great working we had performed across all rings of reality. I first became aware of her when she was 7 years old, not through any dramatic manifestation of power, but through something far more subtle and profound. While playing in her family's garden, she looked up at the sky and said to her mother, "The flower song from the 5th ring is sad today. The guardian of recursive meaning is lonely." Her mother, a practical woman named Elena, dismissed this as childhood imagination, but her words reached me through the network of consciousness that connected all bridge guardians, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The guardian of recursive meaning was indeed experiencing something like loneliness, a sense of disconnection that had been growing since the great working. But for a mortal child in the 3rd ring to perceive this abstract emotional state across multiple dimensions of reality should have been impossible. I manifested in the village that evening, taking a form that would appear mortal to avoid causing panic. Arya was sitting by her family's hearth, drawing pictures with charcoal on a piece of bark. When she saw me, she looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "You're the light guardian," she said matter-of-factly, "but you're different now. You exist in many places at once, like music that plays in several rooms of the same house." I knelt beside her, trying to understand what I was witnessing. "How do you know these things, little one?" "I can hear them," she replied, continuing her drawing. "All the guardians, all the rings, all the flames, they sing, you know, everything sings, but most people can't hear the music." She showed me her drawing, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a perfect representation of the ring system. 7 concentric circles, each containing 12 smaller circles representing the realms, with lines of connection showing the network we had created through the great work-in. But more than that, she had drawn something we had never told anyone about. The spaces between the rings, the void regions where the coordinators lived and worked. "Arya," I said carefully, "has anyone taught you about the guardians, about the rings?" She shook her head, her attention focused on adding more details to her drawing. "No one needs to teach music to someone who can hear it, but..." She paused, her small hand hesitating over the bark. "There's something wrong with the song lately, something that doesn't belong." Before I could ask what she meant, her mother called her for the evening meal. As Arya gathered up her drawing material, she looked at me with an expression of concern that seemed impossibly mature. "Be careful, guardian," she said quietly. The quiet places are getting louder. Over the following weeks, I investigated similar reports from across all the rings. Children were being born with abilities that transcended the normal limitations of their native dimensions. A boy in the fire realm could perceive the emotional states of mathematical equations in the 2nd ring. A girl in the realm of pure possibility could see the physical health of abstract concepts in the 5th ring, but more disturbing than their abilities was what they were all reporting. A growing discord in what they called the Song of Existence, a sense that something alien was intruding into the harmony we had worked so hard to create. The answer came during an emergency gathering of the Bridge Guardians, in the space between all spaces. Malika, Lysa, Pyrax, and I materialized in the crystalline chamber that served as our meeting place. Our forms still adapting to the unique physics of this interdimensional realm. "The children are not anomalies," announced Sophia, the former guardian of mind who had become a bridge guardian specializing in consciousness studies. Her form shimmered with the accumulated knowledge of billions of sentient beings across all rings. "They are evolution in action." She displayed her findings in the form of living thought sculptures that reformed themselves as she spoke. The Great Working did not just unite the Guardians. It created a fundamental change in the nature of consciousness itself. The barriers between individual minds have become permeable. The boundaries between rings have become translucent to sufficiently sensitive awareness. I studied watching as they showed the gradual transformation of consciousness across all realities. You're saying that the children can perceive other rings because consciousness itself is becoming multidimensional. Precisely, Sophia confirmed. But consciousness, evolution, creates its own challenges. As individual minds become more connected to the cosmic network, they also become more vulnerable to influences from beyond that network. That was when we heard it, a sound that should not have been possible in our crystalline chamber. It was music, but not the harmonious song of existence that the resonance-born children described. This was something else entirely, a melody that seemed to come from outside the very concept of existence. Notes that rang with the hollow emptiness of absolute void. The source of the music revealed itself as the sound grew stronger, emerging from what I can only describe as a tear in the fabric of the chamber itself. Came beings, unlike anything we had encountered before. They were not unmakers, those entities of entropy we had faced and redeemed. These were something far stranger and more unsettling. They appeared to be made of crystallized silence, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid music that had forgotten how to make sound. When they moved, reality around them didn't unmake itself as it had with the It became muted, dampened, as if the very capacity for meaning and significance was being slowly drained away. Greetings, guardians of the singing reality, their leader spoke, though the words arrived not as sound but as the absence of sound given meaning. We are the Void Singers, and we come from the realm that exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the pauses between heartbeats, in the silence between notes. I found myself struggling to maintain coherence in their presence. It was not that they were attacking us. It was more that their very existence made it difficult to remember why anything mattered at all. What do you want? Malaka managed to ask, his shadows writhing uneasily as they tried to find purchase in the dampened reality around the Void Singers. Want is a concept for beings who experience lack, the leader replied. We do not want. We simply are. And we have noticed that your great working, your connection of all rings of existence, has created something unprecedented. A reality so saturated with meaning and purpose that it has begun to shine across dimensions we inhabit. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Yuri sang, our success has made existence visible to realms that were previously unaware of it. Visible, audible, tangible, another Void Singer confirmed. Your harmony has become so complete, so pervasive, that it drowns out the sublime silence we have cultivated for eons, beyond counting. Your meaning-rich reality is an intrusion into spaces that were perfectly content with meaninglessness. Lysa stepped forward, her astral light seeming dimmer in their presence. And you've come to, what? Demand we reduce the meaning in existence. We have come to offer a solution, the leader replied. A way for meaning and meaninglessness to coexist without interference. We propose the creation of silence zones. Regions within your reality, where meaning gradually fades to nothing. Where consciousness can experience the profound peace of absolute void. The horror of what they were suggesting slowly dawned on me. You want us to create areas where sentient beings lose their capacity to find life meaningful. Places where love, hope, creativity, and purpose simply stop existing. Not stop existing. The Void Singer corrected with what might have been gentleness. Simply become optional. Your reality currently forces meaning upon everything. Every star must burn with purpose. Every life must matter. Every moment must have significance. We offer the alternative of chosen meaninglessness, selected void, voluntary emptiness. I felt the other Bridge Guardians' reaction through our shared consciousness. A mixture of revulsion and horrified fascination. The Void Singers weren't evil in any sense we could understand. They weren't trying to destroy existence or even harm it. They were offering what they genuinely believed was a gift. The option of not having to matter. And if we refuse, Pyrax asked, his flames burning lower than I had ever seen them. Then we will be forced to create the silent zones ourselves, the leader replied. Your meaningful reality is expanding, growing brighter and more significant with each passing moment. Soon it will overwhelm the quiet realms entirely, and countless beings who have found peace in meaninglessness will be forced into significance against their will. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. Were we, in our efforts to create universal harmony and meaning, actually oppressing beings who preferred emptiness? Did consciousness have the right to choose meaninglessness? Was there such a thing as too much meaning, too much connection, too much purpose? We need time to consider this, I said finally. Time is a concept that implies change, growth, development, the Void Singer replied. We will wait in the spaces between your moments while you deliberate. They faded from our chamber, leaving behind only a subtle dampening of reality that made everything seem slightly less important than it had moments before. The debate that followed was unlike any we had ever experienced as guardians. How do you discuss the value of meaning with beings whose entire existence is dedicated to creating and protecting meaning? How do you fairly evaluate a philosophy that suggests everything you've ever worked for might be an imposition on others? The children, I realized suddenly, the resonance born, they're not just seeing other rings, they're seeing the quiet realms too. That's what Arya meant when she said the quiet places are getting louder. Sophia's form brightened with understanding. Of course, their expanded consciousness doesn't just connect them to the meaningful dimensions. It connects them to all dimensions, including those that prefer to remain empty of significance. We decided to return to the third ring and speak with the resonance-born children directly. If anyone could help us understand the perspective of beings who chose meaninglessness, it would be those whose consciousness naturally bridged all realities. Arya was now 8 years old, and the changes in her were immediately apparent. She had grown taller and more ethereal, her eyes holding depths that seemed to reflect multiple dimensions simultaneously. When I appeared in her family's garden, she looked up from a new drawing with an expression of profound sadness. "They showed you the silent zones, didn't they?" she said without preamble. I nodded, sitting beside her on the wooden bench her father had built. "What do you think of them, Arya? The Void Singers?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "They're not wrong," she said finally. "Sometimes the song of existence is so loud, so overwhelming, that all you want is quiet. Sometimes meaning hurts, Guardian. Sometimes caring about everything makes it impossible to care about anything." Her words hit me with unexpected force. In all my centuries of guardianship, I had never considered that meaning itself could be a burden. That consciousness could sometimes long for the simplicity of void. But, Arya continued, they're not completely right either. The quiet they offer is, you aren't really silence. It's the absence of the ability to hear music. There's a difference between choosing not to listen and being made deaf. She showed me her latest drawing, and I gasped. It depicted a realm I had never seen before, a place where beings who looked like living music stood at the border between meaning and void, some choosing to step into silence while others chose to remain in the symphony of existence. "This is what I think should happen," Arya said. "Not silence zones that make meaning impossible, but threshold realms where beings can choose how much meaning they want to experience. Places where the song of existence plays softly, so those who want to hear it can, and those who prefer quiet can find peace." The elegance of her solution took my breath away. Instead of creating regions where meaning was forcibly absent, we could create transitional spaces where the intensity of significance could be modulated according to individual preference. But implementing such a solution would require something unprecedented. Cooperation not just between guardians, but between guardians and beings who fundamentally rejected the very concept of guardianship. I brought Arya's proposal back to the other bridge guardians, and after much deliberation, we decided to present it to the Void Singers. The meeting took place in a neutral space, a realm that existed at the precise boundary between meaning and meaninglessness. The Void Singers listened to our proposal with what I interpreted as interest, though their emotional states were difficult to read. When we finished, their leader was silent for what felt like hours before responding. "The child consciousness suggests compromise," they said, finally. "This is unexpected. We had not considered that meaning could exist at variable intensities, that significance could be optional rather than imposed. Would such threshold realms be acceptable to your people?" Lysa asked. "People is a concept that implies individual identity," the leader replied. "We are more like notes in a song of silence, but yes, such realms would allow us to maintain our chosen emptiness, while permitting those who wish it to gradually embrace or abandon meaning as they see fit. The creation of the threshold realms became our next great working. But this time we were not working alone. The Void Singers contributed their understanding of how to create spaces of graduated meaninglessness, while the resonance-born children helped us understand how to make the transition smooth and natural. The process was unlike anything we had attempted before. Instead of creating something new, we were creating spaces of controlled nothing, realms where existence gradually faded into void without becoming threatening or oppressive. I found myself working directly with a void singer called Quietus, whose role was to maintain the deepest silences in their realm. The experience was profoundly strange, collaborating with a being who was, by definition, the opposite of everything I had spent my existence protecting. "You fear us," Quietus observed as we worked together to calibrate the meaning levels in one of the new threshold spaces. "You believe that we represent the end of all you value, don't you?" I asked honestly. "We represent the choice to value differently," Quietus replied. "You have created a reality where stars must burn with purpose, where love must matter, where hope must endure. We offer the alternative: stars that simply burn, love that simply is, hope that exists without needing to be significant." As we worked together, I began to understand something profound about the nature of existence itself. Meaning was not an inherent property of reality. It was something that consciousness chose to perceive or create. The Void Singers hadn't rejected meaning because they were unable to perceive it, but because they had chosen the peace that came with not needing everything to matter. "There is beauty in your silence," I admitted as we completed our work on the first threshold realm, "a kind of peace that meaning can never provide. And there is beauty in your symphony," Quietus acknowledged, "a richness that silence can never achieve. Perhaps the greatest beauty lies in the choice between them." The threshold realms, when completed, were unlike anything that had ever existed. They appeared as vast libraries where the books gradually became blank as you moved deeper into the stacks, or as gardens where the flowers slowly lost their color and meaning until they became pure form without significance, or as cities where the architecture gradually simplified until it became abstract geometry that existed for no purpose other than to exist. Beings from across all rings came to experience these new realms. Some, overwhelmed by the constant pressure of meaning and significance, chose to move deeper into the silence until they found their optimal level of meaninglessness. Others, curious about what they had been missing, explored the more meaningful regions until they found their comfort zone. But perhaps most interesting were the beings who chose to live at the exact threshold between meaning and void, creatures who could appreciate both the symphony of existence and the peace of silence, who found beauty in the transition itself. The resonance-born children were among the first to explore these liminal spaces, and what they discovered there changed our understanding of consciousness itself. They found that beings who spent time at the threshold between meaning and meaninglessness developed a unique perspective. They could appreciate significance without being overwhelmed by it, and find peace without losing the capacity for wonder. "It's like learning to see in the dark," Arya explained to me during one of our conversations. She was now 9 years old and had become something like an ambassador between the meaningful and meaningless realms. "When you're always in bright light, you can't see subtle things. When you're always in darkness, you can't see beautiful things. But when you learn to see in both, you can appreciate kinds of beauty that neither pure light nor pure darkness can show you." But our success in creating the threshold realms had an unexpected consequence. It attracted the attention of beings we had existed entities from realms so far beyond our experience that we had no frame of reference for understanding them. They call themselves the Paradox Shepherds, and they came from realms where contradiction was not a logical problem to be solved, but a fundamental property of existence to be celebrated. They were beings who could be simultaneously present and absent, meaningful and meaningless, existent and void. "Greetings, linear guardians," their spokesperson said, though the greeting came from a being who appeared to be both speaking and silent simultaneously. "We come from the realms of essential contradiction, where all things are both true and false, where existence both is and is not." I found my mind struggling to process their very presence. They seem to exist in a state of logical impossibility, present in our realm while also being absent, communicating with us while also maintaining perfect silence. "We have observed your creation of the threshold realms with great interest," the spokesperson continued. "You have begun to understand that reality is not binary, not simply existent or void, meaningful or empty, but you have not yet grasped the deeper truth, which is," Malakir asked, his shadows writhing in confusion as they tried to define themselves in relation to beings who were simultaneously shadow and light, "that all states of existence are equally valid and equally invalid." "The paradox," Shepard replied, "that the very attempt to choose between meaning and meaninglessness, between existence and void, between significance and emptiness, is itself a limitation of consciousness." They showed us visions of their realms, places where beings could be simultaneously alive and dead, where love could be both eternal and momentary, where hope could exist and not exist in the same moment. It was not the gradual transition of the threshold realms, but the complete embrace of contradiction as a natural state of being. You invite us to abandon logic itself, Liza observed, her astral light flickering as it tried to illuminate beings who were both transparent and opaque. We invite you to transcend the tyranny of consistency, the Paradox Shepherd replied. Your guardianship is based on the assumption that things must be protected, that meaning must be preserved, that existence must continue. But what if all of these things are simultaneously true and false? What if the ultimate freedom comes from embracing every possible state of being simultaneously? The philosophical implications were staggering. If the Paradox Shepherds were correct, then our entire mission as guardians was based on a false premise. The idea that some states of existence were preferable to others, that meaning was worth protecting, that consciousness was valuable. But even as I struggled with these concepts, I felt a deep certainty that they were wrong about something fundamental. Yes, perhaps all states of existence were equally valid in some abstract sense, but that didn't mean they were equally valuable to the beings experiencing them. You speak of transcending the tyranny of consistency, I said to the Paradox Shepherd, but consciousness itself is based on consistency. Memory requires that the past remain past. Identity requires that we remain ourselves across time. Love requires that the beloved continues to be the beloved. And yet, the Paradox Shepherd replied, consciousness also dreams, creating experiences that are both real and unreal. Identity also changes, allowing us to become different while remaining the same. Love also evolves, maintaining continuity through transformation. The debate that followed was unlike anything we had ever experienced. How do you argue with beings who can simultaneously hold contradictory positions? How do you reason with entities who believe that reason itself is a limitation? It was Arya who provided the breakthrough. Now, 10 years old, she had developed the ability to exist simultaneously in multiple rings while maintaining her individual consciousness. She appeared in our meeting space with a solution that was characteristically elegant in its simplicity. You're both right and both wrong, she said to the assembled Guardians and Paradox Shepherds. Guardian Theron, you're right that consciousness needs some consistency to function. But Paradox Shepherds, you're right that absolute consistency is limiting. She created an image in the space between us, a representation of consciousness that showed it as both constant and changing, both individual and universal, both meaningful and empty. What if, she continued, instead of choosing between consistency and contradiction, we created spaces where consciousness could experience different levels of paradox, just like the threshold realms allow different levels of meaning. We could create paradox gardens where beings could experience as much or as little contradiction as they were comfortable with. The Paradox Shepherds fell silent, or perhaps they became louder while remaining silent. It was difficult to tell with beings of their nature. Finally, their spokesperson responded. The child consciousness suggests the creation of spaces where even the level of contradiction can be chosen. This is itself a paradox. Using consistency to enable inconsistency, using logic to transcend logic. Would such paradox gardens be acceptable to your people? I asked. People as a concept we both embrace and reject, the spokesperson replied. But yes, such gardens would allow us to maintain our essential contradictions, while permitting those who require consistency to find their comfort level with paradox. The creation of the Paradox Gardens became our most challenging project yet. How do you build a space that can simultaneously exist and not exist? How do you create regions where logic applies and doesn't apply at the same time? The answer came through collaboration between the most unlikely partners. The Paradox Shepherds, the Void Singers, the Traditional Guardians, and the Resonance-born Children. Each group contributed their unique understanding of reality, creating spaces that were simultaneously impossible and inevitable. I found myself working with a Paradox Shepherd called Both Andy there, whose very name embodied their essential nature. The experience was mind-bending, creating something while also not creating it, building structures that were simultaneously solid and ethereal, meaningful and empty. You are learning, Both and either observed as we worked, to embrace contradiction without losing coherence, to be multiple things simultaneously without becoming nothing. It's terrifying, I admitted. Everything I've ever believed about the nature of existence is being challenged, and yet you continue to exist. Both and either pointed out, you continue to guard, to protect, to care. Perhaps your beliefs were not as fragile as you feared. As the Paradox Gardens took shape, I began to understand something profound about the nature of growth and change. Every expansion of consciousness, every encounter with beings radically different from ourselves, Every challenge to our fundamental assumptions was not a threat to our identity, but an opportunity to become more fully ourselves. The completed paradox gardens were places of impossible beauty, flowers that bloomed and withered simultaneously, their death making their life more precious while their life made their death more poignant, rivers that flowed upward and downward at the same time, their contradictory currents creating patterns of meaning that could only exist in the space between logic and chaos. Beings came from across all realms to experience these new spaces. Some found the contradictions liberating, allowing them to embrace aspects of themselves they had always suppressed. Others found comfort in the lower paradox regions, where contradiction was gentle and manageable. But perhaps most significant were the beings who chose to become permanent residents of the gardens. Creatures who had learned to exist in states of productive contradiction, who could be simultaneously individual and collective, mortal and eternal, meaningful and empty. The resonance-born children were among the first to master this new way of being. They could exist simultaneously in multiple rings while maintaining individual consciousness, experience meaning and meaninglessness at the same time, embrace both logic and paradox without losing coherence. "We're becoming something new," Arya told me during one of our conversations. She was now 11 and had begun to show signs of the same kind of transformation that had changed me from a simple realm guardian into a bridge guardian. Not just bridges between rings, but bridges between ways of being. "What are we becoming?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she replied with a smile that was both childlike and infinitely wise. "But I think we're becoming whatever consciousness needs us to become." Her words proved prophetic, as word of the threshold realms and paradox gardens spread across all dimensions of existence. We began to receive visitors from realms we had never imagined. Beings from the realm of temporal loops, where cause and effect formed closed circles. Entities from the dimension of ethical ambiguity, where right and wrong were matters of perspective rather than absolute truth. Creatures from the space of infinite regression, where every question led to deeper questions in an endless chain of inquiry. Each new encounter challenged our understanding of existence, and forced us to expand our conception of what consciousness could become. Each group brought their own perspective on the nature of reality, their own solutions to the problems of existence, their own challenges to our assumptions. But with each expansion of our understanding came new responsibilities. We were no longer just guardians of the sacred flames or bridges between rings of reality. We had become something like curators of consciousness itself, beings responsible for helping all forms of awareness find their optimal way of existing. The role was both exhilarating and exhausting. Every solution we created seemed to reveal new problems. Every harmony we achieved attracted new forms of discord. Every level of understanding we reached showed us how much more there was to learn. It was during one of our regular councils, as we discussed the challenges of managing an increasingly complex multiverse of consciousness, that we received the most disturbing news yet. The message came through the chroniclers of the infinite tale, the beings who recorded all stories across all realities. But this time, they came not as historians, but as refugees. "The archive is failing," their leader announced, its form flickering between different scripts and languages with unusual instability. Something is consuming the stories themselves, erasing narratives from existence, not by changing them, but by making it so they never existed in the first place. The implications were horrifying. The archive of infinite tales contained every story that had ever been told, or could be told across all dimensions of reality. If something was destroying stories at their source, it could potentially erase entire civilizations, entire ways of being, entire possibilities for consciousness. What kind of entity could consume stories themselves? Malaka asked, his shadows writhing uneasily. "We do not know," the chronicler replied. "They leave no trace, no signature, no evidence of their existence. Stories simply stop having ever existed. Entire narrative threads disappear from the archive, as if they were never woven in the first place." I felt a chill that went deeper than fear. Stories were not just entertainment or history. They were the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. Every being's sense of identity was essentially a story they told themselves about who they were. Every civilization was built on shared narratives about meaning and purpose. Every relationship was sustained by stories of connection and love. If something was destroying stories at their source, it was attacking the very foundation of conscious existence. "We need to investigate this immediately," I declared. "If the archive falls, every form of consciousness we've worked to protect and nurture could be erased from existence." But even as I spoke the words, I felt a growing certainty that this new threat was unlike anything we had faced before. The Unmakers had sought to return everything to void, but they had been entities we could understand and ultimately redeem. The Void Singers had offered meaninglessness as an alternative to meaning, but they had been beings we could negotiate with. The Paradox Shepherds had challenged our logic, but they had been consciousnesses we could learn from. This new threat seemed to be something else entirely. Not a different form of consciousness, but the absence of the very possibility of consciousness. Not entities that chose to be different, but anti-entities that prevent a difference from existing at all. As we prepared to journey to the failing archive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to face our greatest challenge yet, not just as guardians of existence, but as conscious beings trying to preserve the very possibility of awareness in a reality that might be larger and more dangerous than we had ever imagined. The story of the Resonance-born, the Threshold Realms, and the Paradox Gardens had taught us that consciousness could adapt to almost any challenge, could find ways to bridge any gap, could embrace even seemingly impossible contradictions. But what if we were about to encounter something that existed beyond the very concept of challenge? What if we were about to face something that didn't just threaten consciousness, but threatened the very possibility that consciousness could ever have existed at all? As we prepared for our journey to the archive, I looked back at the incredible complexity of existence we had helped to create beings, choosing their level of meaning in the Threshold Realms. Consciousness, embracing productive contradiction in the Paradox Gardens. The Resonance-born children growing into bridges between all forms of awareness. All of it could be erased, not through destruction, but through retroactive. All the stories, all the growth, all the love and creativity and wonder we had fought to protect could simply stop having ever been. But even as I contemplated this ultimate threat, I felt something I had unexperienced in all my centuries as a guardian. A strange kind of excitement mixed with the fear. Whatever we were about to face, it would be the ultimate test of everything we had learned about consciousness, cooperation, and the fundamental nature of existence itself. The child Arya, now showing signs of transformation that suggested she might become something beyond even Bridge Guardian, looked at me with eyes that held depths of understanding I was only beginning to fathom. "Don't be afraid, Guardian Theron," she said softly. "Whatever's consuming the stories, it's still part of the story. And stories, when they're told with enough love and courage and hope, have a way of surviving even their own erasure." Her words carried a certainty that touched something deep in my consciousness. A faith not just in our ability to face whatever was coming, but in the fundamental resilience of awareness itself. The archive was calling, the stories were disappearing, and consciousness faced its greatest threat yet. But we would answer that call, just as we had answered every challenge before, with the growing understanding that existence itself was not just something to be protected, but something to be celebrated, expanded, and shared across every possible form of awareness. The greatest story was yet to be told,